introduce which ward they represent and also if they are new or whether they are experienced members of Scrutiny. Councillor Farley.
Thank you, Chair. Luke Farley, Labour Councillor for Bournemouth and Richmond Hill. I am new to this board.
Kate Haig, Labour and Cooperative Councillor for Farnley and Wortley. I am new to this board.
Councillor Adrian McCluskey for Farnley and Wortley, and this is my second year.
Councillor Shafali from Beeston Hallbeck, newly elected, and I'm new on this board as well. Thank you.
Councillor Jones, Councillor for Horsforth, and I'm substituting today.
Morning, everyone. Councillor Annie Maloney, Beeston Holbeck ward, and this is now my third year on this board, a veteran.
Morning, everybody. Mohammed Iqbal, Councillor for Hunslet and Riverside, first time on this board. Recently been on this probably 10 years ago. An older veteran.
Councillor Jules Cecil-Wood, representing Wheatwood ward, and I'm subbing for Councillor Hammond today.
Councillor Lou Cunningham, Armley ward. I'm the Green Party councillor for there, and this is my first year on this board.
I'm Councillor Barry Anderson, representing Allen Wharfdale ward, and I've lost count of the number of years I've been on this particular board.
Thank you to all members. A very warm welcome to our new members. A welcome back for those who are returning, and of course, much appreciation to members who have stepped in to substitute today for those people who couldn't make it. I will now pass over to Becky to introduce herself, as she is a very important part of this Scrutiny board.
Hi, Becky Atherton, Principal Scrutiny Advisor to the board.
Thank you very much. We have a packed agenda today, and I'm going to go straight into those agenda items, if you'll allow me. Agenda item 1.
We've no appeals against refusals of inspection documents today, Chair.
Agenda item 2.
No items excluded from the public domain.
Agenda item 3.
No late items.
Item 4. Any declarations of interest not already reported to member services? I'll take that as a no. Thank you. On to item 5, which is apologies. Becky.
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies from Councillor Norma Harrington, Councillor Abdul Hannan, Councillor Hesselwood is substituting, and Councillor Zara Hussain, Councillor Jones is substituting. Councillor Harland has also asked that her apologies be noted for the performance report.
Thank you, and I'm sure we'll all wish to send our best wishes to Councillor Harland so that she feels well enough to attend for our next meeting. We'll go on to the next item, which is minutes. Becky, would you like to introduce the item, please?
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this item is to approve as a correct record the minutes of the meeting held on the 21st of March 2024. Would you like me to note the matters outstanding, Chair?
Please do.
With respect to minute 99, the update requested on the Community Committee review has been included in your draft work schedule for 24-25. Similarly, minute 100, members requested early engagement with the Green Spaces Play strategy. That's also included in your draft work schedule as requested. On minute 101, the end of year statement from the board has now been published on the committee webpage, and that will feed into the annual report, which will be considered by council on the 10th of July.
Any comments from members? Thank you very much. We'll now move on to our work items. So, terms of reference. We have got some changes to our terms of reference due to changes within the council structure. Becky, would you like to explain those to us?
The terms of reference report sets out both the board's terms of reference and the broad terms of reference for scrutiny boards. So on page 15, you'll see Appendix 1, which includes the general terms of reference applicable to all scrutiny boards. Page 17, Appendix 2, presents Article 6 of the Constitution, and outlines both scrutiny remits and special responsibilities. So members are probably aware that this board is allocated special responsibility for crime and disorder in the Constitution. Pages 23 to 30 set out the scrutiny board alignment with delegated functions for both officers and executive portfolios. For this board this year, the main changes to note are that responsibility for the contact centre now comes under James Rogers rather than Mariana Pexton, and has been brought under Councillor Harland and the remit of this board. And responsibility for an element of equality so far as it relates to communities and service provision now sits with this board. If members could just note that equality so far as it relates to human resources and issues relating to staff still remain with the Strategy and Resources Board.
Thank you, Becky. Any questions from members on our terms of reference? Very good. In particular, the board does welcome the fact that EDI is now formally within our area of interest, because it was already an area of interest in terms of the service delivery of the other departments which come under our jurisdiction. So thank you for that. Shall we move on to our first, if I can find it, item of business, and that is co-opted members. Becky, would you like to go through that?
For information, this report sets out the fact that all scrutiny boards have the provision to appoint co-opted members to their individual scrutiny boards. The report sets out the general provisions regarding co-option, which are applicable to all scrutiny boards. If members could just note, there are no specific legislative requirements for this board to appoint co-opted external representatives, as there are for a number of our other boards. Typically, this scrutiny board has determined not to co-opt external individuals to this board, and instead members have just brought in witnesses or stakeholders for specific items of business as required. That's in part due to the breadth of subjects within your remit. I would recommend to the board that the approach does not change unless you as members reach a point where you feel co-option would add specific value.
Are members agreed with that way forward, that we don't adopt any permanent co-opted members at this stage? Thank you for your agreement. And now we go on to item 9, which is the most substantive item today and is our performance report. The council's commitment to managing and evaluating performance is very much appreciated by all elected members, and different scrutiny boards have jurisdiction to look at different areas of the council and its performance. And ours is quite a wide remit, and therefore we have got quite a lot of performance indicators to go through. One thing that we do appreciate as a scrutiny board is that we have the attention of a very high number of senior councillors and senior officers this morning to go through some of those performance reports. I will invite those executive members to give a short introduction to any areas of interest in their performance report that they wish to specifically emphasise, but I would ask kindly that that is kept short, to allow as much time as possible for members to ask questions about the indicators which are presented for us. If you don't wish to take up the offer, please feel free, but it's there to have an indication of our deference to the work that is done by the leadership that's represented here. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Chair, and also thank you for the invite to allow exec board members to say something at the beginning of the item. But for the sake of brevity this morning, I think all exec board members have agreed that actually we're happy to go straight into the officers and come in later in the item should we need to. Thank you, Chair.
That's much appreciated. Thank you, Councillor Cooper. So we'll go into introduction for the officers. If you'd all like to introduce yourselves, and we'll start with John Mummer.
Sorry, Chair, I wasn't quite prepared then, I apologise. John Woolmer, I'm the Chief Officer for Environmental Services.
Morning, everybody. I'm Paul Money, Chief Officer for the Safer Stronger Communities team.
Morning, everybody. James Rogers, Director of Communities, Housing and Environment.
Morning, everybody. Lee Hemsworth, Chief Officer for Community Hubs Welfare and Business Support.
Good morning, Polly Kirkham, the Chief Officer for Climate, Energy and Green Spaces.
Morning, I'm Mandy Sawyer, Head of Housing and Neighbourhood Services.
Good morning, Adam Crampton, Head of Property Management, Housing Leeds.
Morning, everybody. I'm Ian Strickland. I'm a Business Development Manager and the author of the performance report. Thank you.
Much appreciated. Ian, would you like to introduce the item to understand our process?
Thank you, Chair. The performance report consists of our directorate plan, key performance indicators, and as we have some new members attending today, we've attached a directorate plan as an appendix to today's report, so members can use that as a point of reference. The plan and the indicators highlight the vital roles that our services play in contributing towards the delivery of our best city ambitions. As mentioned by Becky earlier, in a change from last time, this and future reports will now include customer contact centre performance updates, as the contact centre moved into our directorate a little bit earlier this year. We've also included, after our discussions at the pre-meeting, information on our Office for Local Government Indicators, otherwise known as OFLOG. So this information includes updates on the indicators from the waste management area and the latest performance there. There's also further information available on request as to how these indicators are spread across the council, which I'll happily provide. Unless stated otherwise, the figures reported are the 23-24 year-end position. Where we don't have a year-end position, we've always looked, based on feedback last time, to provide a 12-month rolling average, so we've got that fair reflection of any seasonal trends over the reporting year. And we've broken down the supporting commentary into our best city ambition pillars to align with the best city ambition. So the information is broken down in a thematic way around health and wellbeing, inclusive growth and zero carbon. Actions from the last performance report in January, which have been implemented this time, is that we now have separate updates included within the work schedule around our transformation areas of priority work, which was a specific ask last time. So I've included in the cover report where these updates can be found at what time during the work schedule, and also a little bit more information there around tackling hate crime, which we have a small update on today, but also there's going to be further more detailed updates throughout the reporting year. And finally, the specific request last time around the ward breakdown around woodland creation, and that's included as an appendix to this report too. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. I'll bring in Councillor Haigh because she had a question about the presentation of the report.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And obviously there's a lot of information in this report. And I just think in terms of focusing our minds on what we're doing really well and what we're not doing so well, it might be, I was just wondering if there's some way we can present that in the reports so that we can, you know, where we're exceeding and where we're not meeting our targets by a significant amount, whether that could be highlighted in the report. And I know in some places they use red, amber, green to do that. As I say, it's just so that we can look at, it's not so that we don't look at other areas where we're performing to target, because sometimes we might want to examine those targets and see if they're right, or use our experience to of dealing with residents to try and understand more about a service. I just think that, you know, where we know that we're either exceeding or missing targets by a significant amount, perhaps regularly, that ought to be highlighted a bit more in the report if possible.
Yes, Ian.
Thank you, Councillor Haigh, for that feedback. We will look to refine the report next time. It does tie in with a report that's being produced at the moment, the annual performance report for Executive Board, which really does focus on areas progressing well and areas for improvement. So we'll look to build on the format that's been used for Executive Board and apply it for future scrutiny updates.
Thank you, that's appreciated. Shall we go into the report itself, and we'll go to Appendix 1 and start with page 40, which is looking at, it starts at antisocial behaviour. Do we have any questions from members on this area? Not at this stage. Can I ask about the results around residents who feel safe in their local area? I understand that the survey results aren't due until later this year. Why is that? Is that normal?
The survey is undertaken actually by colleagues in the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, as opposed to something that we have oversight of. In terms of the data, what you can see in the information pack is what I think is rolling 12-month data. I think what might come once a year is a kind of perspective on that, going back to the earlier point, potentially about what's the trend saying in terms of satisfaction and public confidence, which is essentially what this one is about. But it's a survey conducted online. It's conducted by colleagues in Wyker, and it's one that reflects the situation across the 5 districts in West Yorkshire. What I can say to members is that in terms of the trend, it's very stable in terms of public confidence in residents who feel safe in the city. If that's helpful, Councillor Galton.
Yes, thank you. There are also some initiatives which are mentioned here, which are intended to have an impact on antisocial behaviour, and a lot of them talk about how we have secured funding from West Yorkshire Combined Authority to create an antisocial behaviour problem-solving team. Also, there's a capable guardian service, which I'm not sure it says what's on the tin, if that's the right expression, which is funds from the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. And then there's another one which is also got extra funding in, and they all talk about extra police officer resources, but doesn't specifically tell us how we're supposed to measure the impact of that extra resource, or whether that resource has actually been diverted from somewhere else. Is that something that you could provide more detail today, or is it something that's more appropriate for when we have our fuller police meeting in July, I understand? Yeah.
Probably a bit of both, Councillor Galton. So certainly in terms of the funding, so the initial sort of references to additional funding, including UK SPF and work that we're doing again with the West Yorkshire Combined Authority. In terms of an additional funding stream, that's looking at Safer Streets funding, which is coming in different rounds. A lot of this funding is coming from government, but it's coming into the West Yorkshire Combined Authority to then be distributed against appropriate applications from each district. And it's right that you highlight a couple of additional developments in the report, Chair. In terms of capable guardians, that is an additional 4 uniformed council officers that are working within my service to provide support and reassurance to members of the public and to businesses in terms of that visible presence and that ability to engage with officers. Those officers are supplementing existing resources working in neighbourhoods, so thinking there about neighbourhood policing resources, and in certain parts of the city, additional council resources as well. So that's a welcomed addition. In terms of the problem-solving capability that you referenced, Chair, we have used funding to secure an additional post so that we can to aid really in terms of our collaboration work and particularly look at early intervention and problem-solving initiatives in local communities. Both of those 2 issues, and in terms of the work that those resources are doing, probably are better explored in the subsequent meeting, as indeed I suggest, Councillor Galton, would be the policing matter that I know you and I have spoken about, if that's helpful.
Yeah, that's very helpful. If in the meantime we could have the evaluation criteria for these initiatives that are listed here on page 40 and 41, that'd be really useful. to understand. Councillor Kluski.
Thank you, Chair. Just in relation to the dangerous driving and the misuse of motor vehicle strategy, the biggest concern, or one of the big concerns of residents in our ward, is the misuse of electric bikes and the speed that people are riding those on, and obviously the intention of the rider, often balaclavaed. Is there any strategy to deal with electric bikes and their misuse? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor McCluskey. Probably, I may have said this before, but probably in terms of antisocial behaviour impacting on local residents, the issue that you highlight is absolutely up there in terms of and actually we see it in most wards. We see an increased prevalence of the issue in certain wards, but I don't think any ward is particularly immune from that type of behaviour. And indeed, in the past, we've had the ride out type activity where significant number of people either on electric bikes or otherwise mechanically propelled motor vehicles are coming through our communities. I think it would be fair to say that we have developed our response in partnership, particularly with West Yorkshire Police, around that issue. It's a very difficult issue to address when it's occurring, because there are all sorts of safety issues that colleagues and officers need to take into account. And there have been a number of instances in other parts of the country where there have been significant problems on the back, particularly of police intervention at the time those incidents are occurring. What we've tried to focus on very much is two things. Thinking about the work we're doing to prevent that type of activity in the first instance, and indeed working with local members and other representatives of local communities, because often it's a very localized issue in terms of those that are involved in this type of thing. And so intelligence and information about who's involved is really critical. The other thing that we've tried to do is to kind of increase the suite of kind of tactical options to address this issue. And the development of a citywide PSPO provides some additional powers, predominantly used by our police colleagues, that sit outside of the Road Traffic Act and indeed some of the more civil legislation that we do use within the council, to try to ensure that we've got every available power to address the issue that you're highlighting, for the reasons that for the reasons that you are highlighting it, because it's such an issue. And we recognise as well that I think for a lot of residents, seeing people ride either the more powerful or the adapted electric bikes, which are a significant issue, or indeed the off-road motorcycles with balaclavas, has a real impact in terms of fear of crime as well, in terms of undermining confidence in the safety of a particular place. So we're working as collegiately as we can to address that particular issue, and there is a strategy in place to do that. And some of the mechanisms I've just referenced there form part of that wider approach. The key thing for me really around this issue is community intelligence, because we have the means to act where we've got information that people are involved in this type of thing, and we have opportunities to do things like seize particular vehicles. The technicalities of what is and what isn't legal in terms of electric scooters and electric bikes is a real area for discussion. And again, that might be one that's better explored in the subsequent conversation, where we will have colleagues from the West Yorkshire Combined Authority and West Yorkshire Police joining us at Scrutiny, I think in July, as Councillor Galton has said. Hope that's helpful for now.
Thank you.
Yes, and an associated issue has arisen, actually, because you were talking about working with elected members in terms of tackling the problem. One of the things that we wish to do as elected members in my ward was to furnish our local neighbourhood policing team with electric bikes of their own, which would enable officers to pursue people who were showing antisocial behaviour. Unfortunately, we have been blocked, even though the money is there, from actually purchasing those vehicles because of the procurement policies of West Yorkshire Police centrally. And I think it would be useful if you could use your good agencies to perhaps come forward with a solution or a narrative, at least, on how that can be overcome, so that local initiatives can help and add value to what is being decided centrally by the police. And that'll be useful for our next meeting. Thank you. Councillor Cunningham.
Thank you. In addition to that, and probably slightly upping the ante in terms of technology, are there any moves to use drone footage to collect community intelligence?
Councillor Cunningham, nice to see you again. Yes, there are. Not from within my service, but there is a developing capability from within West Yorkshire Police around the use of that type of technology, which has historically been used more in the context of searching for missing people, particularly over significant swathes of agricultural land and that type of thing. But though that the use of that technology is now forming a greater part of operational policing, used particularly around sporting events, protests, but also where police colleagues in particular, supported by the local authority, feel that it can add value. I think that's a real developing and evolving operational level of local policing. And again, probably one that's better unpacked by our policing colleagues in terms of exactly where they are with that capability. But it does exist, and it operates on a West Yorkshire level rather than a Leeds level, but is provided and the provision of it in Leeds is there.
Councillor Jones.
Yeah, we've obviously experienced this, but our thoughts on this and thoughts of the police is that many of the people who are doing this are not coming from Leeds, coming from elsewhere. And I think that is the difficulty. And I suggest the only solution really is to make it compulsory. There's some registration on the vehicles that they're using, because until you do that, the other alternative would be to ban them completely, which I'm not against, if I'm absolutely honest, because we see this nightly on a nightly basis. But I think it's a very difficult one to solve for that reason. So I have some sympathy for yourself and the police with that.
Yeah, I think I mean, just qualifying that point, for some of our geographies, perhaps closer to the Bradford border, for instance, we do see some cross-border activity and do work with the local neighbourhood policing teams in Bradford on those issues. So you're right in that respect. But I would still go back to the vast majority of this is happening on our estates. And in and around our estates, and it is predominantly local people. Where we've got intelligence about cross-border activity, then we'll work with the appropriate resources, and the significant one is work with colleagues in Bradford.
Councillor Hazelwood.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we'd also appreciate some info on the electric bikes, because we've been approached in our community committee. We haven't got quite as far down the line because we were sort of looking at this municipal year. So yeah, that would be really appreciated if we could have that. I just wanted to ask about a comment and a question really about the PSPOs, because obviously we have the PSPO which covers the Otley Run. Starts at the Otley Run in my ward and goes all the way through Headingley and down. And we have had some enforcement days. We've had meetings about that through May, which have worked really well. And we've seen, residents and ourselves have seen really good presence out up and down Otley Road, which has been great. The problem we've got is that once those action days end, and we know that we can only do those for so many because we've got a finite resource in the city, what we find is that the ASB starts again. So and similar to Councillor Jones's point, a lot of this is coming from people outside the city. So students within the city know that the PSPO's there. They know that they're going to get fined. They know the consequences, and we have just allocated some funding for lots of signage all the way up and down Otley Road now to warn people. But we get a lot of people coming on coaches outside the city, do it once and go, and have absolutely no regard for our residents or anybody else up and down Otley Road, and is causing a lot of problems. So yeah, great that we've had the action days, which is really welcome, but it's what we do in between there. We've got the PSPO, but we really need to look at how we can enforce it more regularly.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Hesselwood. I mean, I did reference earlier on about, working with local members. And if you don't mind, this is a really good example of where we did work closely with you and ward colleagues. And I remember the conversations we had at the outset. And in terms of the, you haven't referenced it, but in terms of your support financially for the additional resources on that particular initiative, is critical because you're right. There is a resource challenge and a budget challenge. I'm really pleased that your feedback correlates with mine and the officers in terms of the effectiveness of I think the 4 Saturdays that we did through May. One of the things we're picking up now is just looking at the benefit of that actually in some respects was bringing together resources through that additional financial support who wouldn't ordinarily be deploying on a Saturday afternoon in a particular community. So one of the things we're looking at now is the effectiveness of bringing those resources together and what we can maybe mainstream from the learning from that experience. And there was a lot of learning and hopefully a lot of community benefit. We can't, if I'm honest, replicate that without the additional support that we've had in full, but we will do as much as we can to try to make sure that where the good practice were identified, we'll try to accommodate it into daily business insofar as we can. But very keen to work with you and indeed any other member or members on issues playing out in communities, because it's through doing that together that I think we get that extra value.
Thank you, Paul. Are there any other community safety issues members wish to raise before I go to hate crime? Councillor Anderson, you can come back.
Is the PSPO, have you got to that page yet or not?
The PSPO?
Yeah.
I think we've just been discussing it, haven't we? Yes, you want to raise a point, Councillor Anderson?
To be enforced in our area, but how do we go about getting it enforced in our area? Because there is still, the police, when I've spoken to them, feel that there is other legislation that they would prefer to use instead of that. So what is the position with it? I'm not saying the police aren't enforcing it, by the way. I'm just saying they prefer to use existing legislation and not the PSPO. Where do we stand as a council? Because we've put a lot of effort into developing that.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Anderson. And I do know from conversations you and I have had about your ongoing liaison with local neighbourhood policing teams in your area about that issue, and perhaps that's something we can explore in more detail. Although what I would say is that in some respects it's not an either or. It's about creating sufficient capacity for resources to deal with an issue by whatever that appropriate means might be. And without knowing specifically about the issues that you're referencing there, it may well be entirely appropriate for the police colleagues to use additional legislation to address a particular issue. The PSPO is not there really to kind of provide some sort of overarching kind of legal framework. It's there to address what we think might be gaps in terms of the criminal and the civil legislation that's currently available. So what police colleagues and indeed my team try to do is look at the suite of tactical options that we've got to and to be honest, in some respects, at a base level, I'm not bothered what legislation anybody uses so long as we address the issue that local residents are experiencing in the most efficient and effective way. But in terms of the particulars of what you're talking about, Councillor Anderson, I'm more than happy to have a conversation with you about the detail in that and continue the liaison with police colleagues as well.
Thank you. I just want to go on to the issue of hate crime on page 45. Because it was somewhat of a surprise to understand that reported hate crime is, according to this data, reducing when we have been told that there is heightened tensions due to the ongoing conflict in Gaza within communities, and that there is a heightened level of reporting of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, but this doesn't seem to be reported in the statistics here. And I know that we're going to have a more in-depth look at this later on in our work schedule as a scrutiny board. But one of the things that we were interested when we first asked was how the city can tackle hate crime outside of Leeds City Council. And one of the things that we wanted more details on was where people are reporting the hate crime which is being permitted against them. What is the scenario? What is the geographical basis for it? Was it when people are at work? Is it when people are in a social setting or whatever? And in this reporting, it talks about high risk environments, which we were told they didn't know where the reporting actually came from. So I'm not sure if this is statistically backed up and it will help our inquiry later on, or whether this is just where people think that the environment's a higher risk. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Chair. And I guess for new members, perhaps important just to point out a couple of things here. The statistics paint a picture in terms of reported hate crime to West Yorkshire Police. They paint a picture. They don't do any more than that. I think statistics around this type of thing, and there are some other areas, particularly my portfolio, such as domestic violence and abuse, where we monitor the statistics. We are not necessarily seeking here to champion a reduction in hate crime, because we know there's a significant underreporting issue with such issues. We do have, and we do benefit in the city from a strategic hate crime board, which, in terms of delving into the devil in the detail here, Chair, we'll be referencing a lot more detail at the forthcoming scrutiny session that you've already referenced. In terms of what the statistics are saying, as you can see there is a recorded reduction. I think, quite apart from the issue I've talked about in terms of this telling only part of the story, there have been significant changes nationally to police recording standards, which has meant that a comparison year on year with a number of different crime types needs to be done with caution, because some of the incidents are now being categorised as other things, for instance. So there's a degree of caution around that. In terms of the broad picture on hate crime, you can see that notwithstanding what I've just said, there is a reduction being reported. Where there hasn't been a reduction is in terms of the faith strand of hate crime, where we have seen it is in fact the only strand that is showing an increase. So notwithstanding what I've said about recording standards and practices, we are still seeing an increase in faith related hate crime, and that predominantly links to the point that Councillor Galton made around the challenge that we're experiencing locally from events going on many miles from here in the Middle East, because the majority of that faith related hate increase is associated with anti-Muslim prejudice, which is significantly the highest one, but also big percentage increases as well in anti-Semitism. So there is obviously a strand of work being done, overseen by the hate crime board that I've referenced, around hate generally, but we are focusing very much on that faith-related issue in all sorts of different ways, not just in my team, but wider across the council. In terms of reporting, Councillor Galton, we are doing two things really of note, over and above maybe what you'd expect. One is working to increase signposting centres for people, so where the public are attending, we're doing as much as we can in terms of signposting them and raising awareness around our work on hate crime, and we're also looking to increase reporting centres as well. There's quite a bit of detailing all of that, and it will form part of the update that's due to come, Councillor Galton, if that's helpful in terms of context around the questions you've asked.
Yes, thank you. So for the benefit of new members of the Scrutiny Board and others, we will be looking at this in greater depth in our meeting in December. But one of the goals that we hope to achieve in that is that we would help to involve as many people within the city, whether they be as employers, employees, work colleagues, associates, in social groups, to be allies and advocates for reducing the level of hate crime wherever it occurs. And so I look forward to, well, don't look forward to, but we will look at that with interest in December. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Councillor Golden. And just to add to what Paul said about the statistics in terms of the spike within faith in hate crime. And just to give Scrutiny Board some reassurance, really, that as a council, we are working with all our communities in the city to bring all communities together and obviously ensure that they feel safe in our city. We know that we cannot resolve the conflict in the Middle East from this town hall or this civic hall here. But what we do know, what we need to do is to work really closely with our communities to ensure that them going about their business and their daily lives in our city, that they feel safe in order to be able to do that. And so we have already had a conference last year that's, I think it's noted in the papers here, between the Muslim community and the Jewish community. Were invited and it was, you know, a really successful event at the time. And we have continued to meet with those communities in particular around the issues that they're facing in the city. To do with obviously the spike in hate crime that they're facing. So just to give some reassurance around the work that continues.
That assurance, I'm sure, is very much appreciated by all. Thank you, Councillor Cooper. We'll now move on. Oh, sorry, Councillor Iqbal.
Thank you. Just wanted to thank Paul and Councillor Cooper's contribution on this and welcome the work that is going to take place. But one thing as a Muslim, I can mention that, like Paul says, it is underreported, the hate crime against Muslim community, and I can only speak for Muslim. Whereas it's, I mean, I can give you my example. When I became a councillor, there was an incident and somebody threw abuse in the counting hall, without naming which party, and I didn't report. So it's a common thing that in the Muslim community, you know, they used to be throwing remarks which are not reported, whereas certain communities are good at reporting incidents. And I would emphasize that we need to ensure and all the communities to report as much as possible if anything happens.
Thank you, Councillor Iqbal. We'll now move on to our housing tenant satisfaction measures part of the performance report. Do we have any questions from members? Not at this stage. Oh, Councillor Anderson.
Where are we? Well, a number of years ago, the Scrutiny Board looked at the Mayor's contract, which is due for renegotiation soon. Is that still going to be renegotiated in the next year or so, or is it now being shelved for whatever reason? Because we brought everything else in-house, effectively, apart from the west of the city. What's happening with that? There was always talk that Mears was going to be brought, that contract would be brought in-house as well. What is the position?
Thanks, Councillor Anderson. Yeah, you're absolutely right. The Mayor's contract operates in the west of the city, with LBS operating in the south and east of the city. The current contract is due to run until the end of September 2026. So our kind of arrangements post September 2026 are in development as we speak, and will be consulted accordingly when we have developed that. But quite early in that process at the moment, given the timescales that we're talking about.
Thank you. Councillor Manolini.
Just on the void properties, it's obviously good to see that it's gone down from last year, but what is the biggest delay in getting these back into a state of, you know, well, being able to live in? And is this looking like an ongoing issue, or is it looking like it will get better and better as the year goes on? Because I remember, was it last year or the year before, it was COVID and supplies that was the biggest problem. But now that we've moved on quite a bit, just wondering, is that still causing the delay?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. The previous delays around supply chains have very much settled now, and not something that we really reflect upon to any great degree. The biggest delay over the last couple of years has just been volume, and getting through that backlog volume. Over the last 12 months, we've seen a net reduction of over 200 properties and are now at that 1% void target, which effectively represents that kind of business as usual levels of activity, which the problem has always been the resource that we have available is kind of based on that business as usual level and achieving targets at that kind of level of turnover. So doing that and the backlog was the real challenge. We've now achieved that. So we're in a position to really focus on those turnaround times rather than that kind of the volume being the key driver.
Councillor Jones.
Regarding mayors and the council suppliers, is there any difference in the satisfaction rates? Because I cover where mayors cover, and I've got to say that the service is not fit for purpose, to be absolutely honest. Is there a difference in satisfaction between that and what the rest of the city, or is it about even?
I don't have the exact numbers at my fingertips, Councillor, but I can certainly provide them. Last month, I think from memory, there was about a 2% variance between LBS and mayors in terms of customer satisfaction with the repair service. It's our KPI R4 is that particular measure in favour of LBS, around about 2% higher satisfaction levels.
Councillor Lennox.
I just wanted to come in really quickly about the voids question as well. I said this in another meeting recently. There's a reason that there's a target of 1% voids, and that's because if we have void properties, it means that our tenants are moving into more suitable accommodation. It means that we're able to move people out of whether that's the move they choose to move into private rented, or they choose to buy, or they change where they're living, and that means that we can get more people in off our housing register. So there will always be an amount of voids, and running at 1% is, as Adam said, the sort of business as usual rate that we run at. But in terms of bringing down the number to that functioning level, that's actually going to bring us 1.75 million more income in rents this year, because those properties are let rather than in void. So it's always good to bring that to the lowest working point, but we do want void properties because that means people are being housed in more suitable accommodation.
Councillor Iqbal.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Lennox, that's helpful, and my question came up from the voids point of view. Yes, it's going to bring in revenue. We're going to be housing more people, but just want to bring to everybody's attention that housing, a request for housing is the most highest demand from constituents. I get about 15, 20 requests. And when you hear about the number of the situation the families are in, it's, you feel sorry for them. 8 people living in a 2-bedroom house. So the sooner we repair these void properties, the better it is in all aspects. But just follow on, if anybody knows what's the number of housing stock we have, council housing stock, and what's the waiting list? Because last time it was in the region of 25,000 people on the waiting list. So do you know the exact number? Thank you.
I don't know if Mandy or other officers want to add anything after this, but you're right that housing is just the thing at the top of all of our inboxes, the thing at the top of what people come and speak to us about at our surgeries. The current housing waiting list is around 26,000 applications. I believe 7,000 or 8,000 of those are Band A at this point, which is an increase from previous years. As councillors, we all know that we are seeing more and more Section 21 no-fault evictions, where families are being evicted from their private rented accommodation, whether that's because the landlord is selling the property, moving out of the landlord game, or whether it's because they're reletting the property at a higher price that they don't want to, that their current tenants can't pay. Those people are coming to us, and because they are homeless, because they're being evicted, they are going into that Band A cohort of applicants. Band A is the highest level of housing need. We have 54,000 Leeds properties and a number of housing association properties, around 10,000 nominations to housing association properties. It's not enough. We need to be doing what we are doing with our council house growth programme. We're building as many social rented homes as we can across the city and working with partners to build as many as we can across the city. But while we still have right to buy, taking houses out of our stock, while we still don't have protections for renters in terms of Section 21 evictions or in terms of other things that affect how secure their tenancies are in their rented properties, Housing Leeds is the place that people are coming when they are destitute, because they're being evicted, because or as you say, people are living in overcrowded conditions, because the costs of private rented housing are so high that they're just unattainable for people, especially people with young families, people who we know wages are being suppressed, people are on low incomes. It's a crisis. So in Leeds, we do have a good record of managing the numbers of people who are seeking temporary accommodation. We've got good partnerships across the city that mean that we are keeping on top of things, but it is extremely, extremely challenging for the service at the minute.
Councillor Lennox, can we expand on some of that? You've just done an excellent overview of the affordable housing scene in the city and how we are very much more reliant now on partnerships with housing associations, for instance, to we subsidise them to build properties where they are more appropriate to access finance to deliver affordable homes and whatever. The issues that we're looking at today are around tenant satisfaction, aren't they? And we want to make sure that when people are in affordable properties that they're getting the right services and repairs are being done on time. Since we are in a much closer association with housing associations, is there a possibility that we could have some kind of reciprocal reporting of their tenants and their satisfaction, since many of them are actually associated with them through our agencies in terms of choice-based lettings? I think it would be useful so that the Leeds City Council isn't just seen as separate in terms of enablers for decent housing and decent standards of service to people in affordable housing. Could we have that perhaps reported in the future through discussion in those partnerships that you're talking about?
Mandy may have a fuller picture of how that might happen, but we do have strong partnerships with housing associations on a West Yorkshire level. I think we mentioned actually in our chair's brief discussion that we had that we'd be really happy to contact the chair of the West Yorkshire Housing Partnership. That's what the name of it is, isn't it? Nick Atkin, I'd be very happy to make introductions and invite them, but I'll let Mandy say a few things more.
Okay, so in terms of housing association, we do have a very strong relationship with our housing association partners in Leeds. We achieve around 800 nominations from the housing register into housing association homes each year. That is much more than our West Yorkshire partners, so seen as a really positive approach. We do work closely with them to explain the pressures and the increasing pressures that there are on social housing and on the register. We have recently reviewed our nominations agreement to try and strengthen further the number of nominations that we get, but we have said that we want to do more. We are doing some work at a West Yorkshire level to work with homeless authorities to then work with the West Yorkshire Housing Partnership to try and strengthen that approach across the region. And I think there is probably more that we can ask for, but certainly there's a lot more that our West Yorkshire partners can be asking for as part of that nominations arrangement. I think the other thing to add is you're aware we are reviewing our lettings policy, because of these increased pressures that have been happening over a number of years but are escalating at pace. We are currently reviewing the lettings policy. We undertook consultation earlier this year and are working up those proposals to return to Exec Board in October with proposed changes to the policy, which will be very much the main focus is on how we can best meet that most urgent housing need.
Thank you. And are now any discussions happening in terms of tenant satisfaction and how that can be reported?
Okay, so the TSMs that are reported in this report are the TSMs that we have reported to the regulators. So they're all social landlords have reported their performance to the regulator and they have to do so by the end of June. That will then be published later this year. At that point, that information will be published for all landlords nationally. I think it's probably appropriate at that point that we pull that information together for Leeds-based housing associations and share that with the Scrutiny Board. And probably that's a point where we can have that conversation around more widely that relationship on tenancy management and how we can strengthen that.
Great, thank you. Councillor Cunningham.
It was just a quick point, Chair, that maybe we could add Nick Atkins to our list of people to invite when we do a deeper dive.
Sorry, that's a session we can certainly take up. Councillor Anderson.
Wondered, how are you progressing with the relationship with these providers in terms of antisocial behaviour? We have an excellent antisocial behaviour team within the council who keep on top of things with our own tenants. There's always been a disconnect, I think is probably the nicest way of putting it, between our other partners out there. A few months ago, I got a briefing from someone in the ASB team that they're trying to work with these various providers. Where are we now with the progress with that discussion?
Okay, so as part of the new regulatory standards, there are 4 consumer standards and all landlords are obliged to comply with the expectations in those consumer standards. One of those expectations, there are several expectations in terms of antisocial behaviour and the management of antisocial behaviour. One of those expectations is that if you are a private registered provider, i.e. a housing association, that you work with your local authority to respond to issues of antisocial behaviour. So what we have seen over recent months is that housing associations are more proactively contacting LASBAT to create those stronger connections to evidence that there is that more strategic approach and supported approach to the management of antisocial behaviour. So I think over the course of the next few months, we will see a much more robust relationship with our housing association partners on ASB.
So how do I, and anybody else who's got the issues in their wards, work better with them? Because in other words, do I just contact our antisocial behaviour team, who in turn will contact the relevant one, or is there a better way of contacting these housing association ASB teams?
So each housing association is responsible for managing its own antisocial behaviour. They may have a service level agreement with the LASBAT team to support in terms of some of that activity. So the contact should always be with the housing association in the first instance.
We can take that up later in the year, Barry. So I think that concludes all the discussion around housing issues. Shall we move on to waste collections? Any questions from members? I think we're waiting for our waste strategy meeting. Oh no, Councillor Anderson.
Point, James or Mr. Wilmer, but I acknowledge that you are 99% efficient in terms of but why is it the same areas of the city? And I'm not just talking about my own ward just now. I'm talking, every time you look at the end of day report, it's the same wards that seem to get hit. And if it's 99% of the time everything's going well, that means that your staff have only got 1% to deal with in terms of misses. So you would expect a better service. Why is that not occurring?
Thanks, Councillor Anderson. I think in terms of the overall demands on the service, we've discussed a number of times over the years at Scrutiny. We collect 500,000 bins a week across Leeds. And even though the non-collection rate may be small, when you apply a small percentage to 500,000 bins, it produces quite a big figure. So that's one point we'd make. And so we do recognise the fact that for everybody that has the bin mist, that's a problem to them in terms of having to manage waste, particularly if it's a black bin. And we do all we can to get those bins recovered within 2 working days. We don't always achieve that, but I think most of the time, the vast majority of the time, we do. I can certainly have a look at providing some analysis around the missed bin end of day report and the wards that seem to ward voice analysis of that to see if the point you're making, Councillor Anderson, is borne out in those statistics. My instincts would be it won't be. So I'm quite happy to do that and provide that and look to and then see what that shows. My instinct is that it will show quite a spread across wards across the city. When we send the end of day report out to members, it's worth reflecting that you don't get the end of day report if you don't have any missed bins in your ward, or certainly missed bins that we were aware of, and I'm also aware that we don't always know that, and therefore they're not always on the report. So if you don't get an end of day, that means you haven't had any recorded. So it is difficult for ward members to judge how often theirs is missed compared to other people's, because they won't see everybody else's reports. But I'm quite happy to do that analysis, Councillor Anderson, and share that with you. Yeah.
Can you clarify that this is measuring all waste stream bin collections, or is it just one?
Thank you, Chair. It's all waste streams, yeah.
Councillor Farley.
Thank you. Yeah, it's just following up on the point about missed bins. Quite often what I find is that areas within my ward don't get picked up on the report out to councillors, but then I get residents getting in touch with me about it. So it's not necessarily the missed bin report, but rather the streets being missed from the missed bin report. So I suppose my question would be, in the data that you collect, can you feed back if there are any particular streets or problem areas within the city that keep coming up time and time again? Now, I appreciate obviously that's all under review as part of the waste collection strategy across the city. But if we have got any particular areas that keep coming up, if we can report back on that, please.
Through the chair, yeah, certainly, Councillor. One of the things we're trying to look at the moment is through the review we're doing within the service is to try and create a bit of capacity in the team for someone to focus exactly on that. So there'd almost be the frequently missed bins person to look at the data, because we have got good data. Obviously, we've only ever got the data that we've got, and that is, I accept that that's an issue. Always have done here in terms of us, we don't know what we don't know, and often the end of day report doesn't include misses that have happened. But I want someone to try and identify someone that just focuses entirely on that, and the idea would be to look at that from a ward-based viewpoint, probably building up some kind of hit list, if you like, per ward, and working with ward members then around that agreed hit list, if you like, of hopefully a reasonably small number of streets. It'll be vary from ward to ward. So that is something that we are looking at, and I think that will benefit the service as well as the customers in terms of making it more effective and efficient. And I think that's a gap at the moment.
Councillor Hazelwood.
Yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge something that you've done in our ward, which helps with some of these issues. And I know it's resource intensive, but both in Headingley and in Wheatwood, we've had a day each where our neighbourhood policing team have followed the bin truck early morning and actually ticketed those cars that are parked as, cars that are there as an obstruction, which I know comes on the report sometimes that, bin trucks can't access a road because of obstructions. And yeah, we just think that's worked really well. I know it's resource intensive. I know we're relying on the police to follow the truck round, and hopefully by issuing those tickets, it's sending that message to people to not park their car there and obstruct in the future, which would hopefully alleviate some of those problems. But yeah, I just want to say thank you to that. And if we can have more of that, that is welcome. Yeah, because it is solving some problems.
Councillor McCluskey.
Yeah, the missed bin reports are really useful and really appreciate them, but it's the last we ever hear of it. Is there any way of establishing a successful recovery report so that we know we can sign that off? Because 3 days later, we get another email from residents saying still not been done, still not been done.
Yeah, a good point, councillor. That was something that when we originally came to Scrutiny 2-3 years ago, maybe probably more, around trying to improve the end of day report. That was an ambition within it to do that, so that what you'd get is a end of day report that included the carry forward from the previous day. And actually, that's one of the things that happened last night's end of day report that went wrong. So that is something we would like to do still, and we obviously benefit us as well as yourselves and the customers. There are logistical reasons why that's very difficult to do in terms of in terms of the work being given out and keeping track of that and making sure we know what still has to be collected. I think at the moment, until we get into that position, our default position remains that if it's not being collected, we will try our best within 2 days. But if it isn't collected within 2 working days, then the bin should be taken back in, and that kind of just remains our default position. So we're telling you these are the bins that have been missed. If you can help us get that message out, great. Obviously, we can't demand it of you, but it's great, and many of you do, and it's really helpful. But the message to people should be: leave your bin out. If it's not gathered within 2 days, take it back. The problem with that message is if we really stuck to that, and where we've really got a chance to sort of 3 or 4 days later recover and help out. What do we do? Do we say, well, we need to keep on message, and 2 days are gone, so some people have taken it in, some people leave it out. So we try to be pragmatic, and we try to not implement that rule steadfast, but that does then give problems about giving out that message. So yeah, that is something we will be looking at, but I have to be honest, we're not there yet in terms of having that reliable data to give you on a reliable basis.
Councillor Jones.
First of all, John, thanks for the work you've done recently for us to resolve a couple of issues. What I find frustrating is that when I email you to draw your attention to something that isn't on the end of the report, I normally get an email back 2 weeks later telling me it's now been cleared. Well, yeah, I'm sorry. That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking, why wasn't this on the end of the day report, but also when's it going to be cleared? I'll be honest, we say to our people, don't take your bin in for 4 days, because sometimes you're able to do that, and I think that's a sensible approach. But that's the bit I find really frustrating. I had a resident ringing me up on Sunday afternoon, then he rang me up on Monday morning to tell me that his brown bin's not been collected. The other issue with the brown bin, of course, as I understand it, is that it's not a statutory, and I get that, but if it's over full, you're unable to lift it, and that causes a further problem down the line, explaining to residents, actually, you've got too much in it. But if they've got a month, particularly if they've got a fairly large garden, it's going to be over full to be able to, and the difficulty will be then actually lifting it and move. Actually, there's a danger to the actual collectors because it's so heavy. So that's my frustration, is that sometimes it's 2 weeks later before I get a response, but it says actually it's now being cleared. I think, yeah, I know it's being cleared because I've been told. So that's the bit that I find possibly a little bit of thought there. But generally speaking, John, the service you've been giving us, particularly around difficult ones, which you've resolved, it's a big thank you from me, to be absolutely honest.
Can I bring in Councillor Haig first before you respond? Oh, and Farley after that. Okay.
Yeah, I think it follows on in a way about sort of information. So the information you provide to us is known misbins, i.e. ones you've self-reported. And how do you link that up with the reports from members of the public and councillors to see, where those areas are? Is there a way that you link that information together so that to identify these problem areas, because it's certainly something, and I think also sharing the frustration that if we've reported something and told people to leave their bins out, knowing that it's going to be collected, or that it has been collected, would be really helpful to us.
Thank you, Chair. This might potentially be one for the next meeting, but I would like to say, it's within the Hare Hills area, which Bermsofts and Richmond Hill covers alongside Gibson and Hare Hills. We have had the rollout of the new green bins, which is really welcome for residents right across both wards. I suppose my question relates to, obviously we've previously had issues with recycling collection in and around these areas. What efforts are being made around education for residents in terms of kind of what goes in those bins, so that we can obviously keep the stats up and not see a decline?
Thank you. Go through the chair. Thank you. So 3 sets of questions there, kind of related, certainly 2 of them. I think in dealing with the issue around reports that come outside of the system, if you like, from yourselves or direct from residents, that kind of fits with your question around why the members inbox and why you get something about 2 weeks later telling you that something's been done. I agree with the type that's a timing issue to me that needs resolving and speeding up. But that's good that that's happening, because that means that your question is being answered around the members' inbox is then a monitored inbox that creates a case number. So it's our case management system. So you should usually get a response from members that'll include a reference number. So that means they put it on the case management system. So we're recording those instances, so we can then add that data to the other data to bring those together to say, right, that's the full picture. Obviously, some of it will be duplicitous, because some stuff will be reported that is on the end of the day. But that does allow us to build that for that reason. So again, it's one of those issues that I think that's the right way to do things. And for probably 90% of contact from members, the members' inbox does what it needs to do in that regard. It's the sort of 10% more difficult, repetitive instances that cause the greatest frustration to everybody. And I think that's probably more what you're talking about there. And that's what needs to feed into a more intelligence-driven led way of sort of saying, right, so we all know what these repeat roads are. So how are we methodically working with yourselves to work through that? However long it takes, at least you know that they're on a list, that there's something being done to look at it. We can work together on that, whether some of that is with the police being able to help out in some areas, which they are doing, which is great, whether it's yellow lines, whether it's trying to put it on a smaller, hard to access vehicle, whether it is education in the streets around parking, whatever it is, what's the cunning plan for those streets? So we need to get better at that. Like I say, something we're looking to dedicate a resource to. Councillor Farley, the point around recycling bins, yes, thanks for that. So just a quick reminder for the councillors on that, what we did as part of the first phase of the review was to expand alternately recollection. There's still quite perhaps don't know the exact percentage, about 20% of the city that doesn't have alternate recollection. It still has monthly green bins. So our first phase of that, including Councillor Anderson's ward, was to roll out some alternate recollections, I think to about 10,000 properties at the top of my head. And that's gone well in terms of the logistical bit of it, getting the bins out, getting the routes established and collecting, not without seething problems in some places. But you're right, now it's about how can we make sure they're being used properly. We did include literature in writing out to people to say that we're changing into them to fortnightly collection. So they will have had some literature. We tried to make the literature more user-friendly, less wordy, more pictures, more sort of easy to understand, something you can pin up in your kitchen, however you might do it. I think we're at that stage now, when we've done the delivery of it, how can we follow that up? We do try to follow that up, for example, to everybody around the Christmas mail out that goes out in terms of Christmas elections. Again, we repeat the advice there. If we can ever do anything local that we could work with more members on around education, we're always happy to have that discussion with you around that, because I think you'll probably be a better place to understand how it'll land better with people. Okay, Chair.
Thanks. Oh, carry on.
Sorry, I think I'll pick that up with you after the meeting, because I think that's a very appreciated offer especially for areas such as Bermondsey and Richmond Hill.
Great. Sorry, I was just going to draw that discussion to a conclusion around waste. Sorry, Councillor Iqbal.
Thank you. I'll be quick. I'm always brief to the point, Chair. Thank you, John. It's always good to meet you, and you're always very passionate about helping members. However, I just wanted, after Lou's comment, I wanted clarification on enforcement. As you know, we've had problems with obstruction in back streets for years, and it's taken up so much resources from your department, hassle for us as well. And I feel sorry for those residents who are very cooperative. And in fact, they will pull the bins for the whole street to the end just because of one or two individuals who park cars there. So I just wanted clarity, because my understanding was that we can't give fixed penalty. I hope we can, as much as I want to defend my constituents and represent them. But if anybody wants to make obstruction for the vehicles and the services we provide, I'm sorry, they need to be penalised for that. So that's one point. Second point, there's a street, and I was woken up this morning at 5 o'clock. Paul Money will know, I sent an email about sex workers on Tempest Road, but at that time I wrote an email about Harlech Street, which was 4 weeks mixed, but it was never mentioned in end of day report, which is very concerning for residents whose refuse hasn't been picked up for 4 weeks. And then the green bins, every time I meet somebody, they say our green bins have never been collected for a year. So, thank you, Chair.
Councillor Anderson.
I'm going to be quick on this one, hopefully. There's no place in this report, and this is not, it's how do we bring up issues like street cleansing? Because it's not on this report here. So how do we have a mechanism? Because normally if I was in the chair, I'd be saying, we'll stick to the agenda. It's in there, right? So I accept that, but street cleansing's not in here. And why I'm asking the question is there's been changes in the way that street cleansing has been done. There's been a reduction in the number of staff. Now, fine, that was debated at the budget. I'm not wanting to revisit that. I just want to know what's happening in my area, to be quite frank. That's all I want to know. What has actually happened with street cleansing in my area? I mean, I'm asking that purely as the community champion for environment. So I represent everybody.
Can I suggest that that's something which is reported through the community committees? Because obviously that's area-based response, isn't it? Councillor Rafiq.
Yeah, I'm just going to say that Councillor Galton, that Councillor, I'm a community sit on a subcommittee environment and community safety in our northeast community committee area, and we get and I know when we had the community committee review recently, that was one area where members said actually things work really well, where officers come both from the CNT and, well, you can call from even refuse as well, and talk about those local logistical issues. And if somebody's not turning up, and then please do let me know, but it's within your remit to kind of get those updated reports at a local level. Like you said, it is a finite resource, and we've got to obviously, target like high streets and district centres, town centres and all that. But, we do everything. We could actually go through what sort of resources are available in your area through those channels.
Thank you. No, I want to send you some homework. Yeah. And then you can report back at the waste strategy meeting, or you can report back to us in a briefing note in the interim, because Councillor Haig was very well behaved, because she had a big issue that she wanted to raise, but it wasn't on the agenda, wasn't part of the performance related criteria that we're looking at today. That was to do about the introduction of glass recycling. But it does have, and as a member of the Scrutiny Board, she would like a briefing as soon as possible so she can get genned up on the area. And we share that interest as other members. But one of the issues that you have in terms of your collection success is not only is there an obstruction in terms of a car parked on the street, or there is an overgrown tree that the truck can't get past or whatever. It's also to do with the capacity of your waste vehicles. And sometimes they get full before they've finished their delivery round. And I know that you've been looking at reviewing your collection rounds, but also with the introduction of glass waste, it means that potentially more waste is being collected by our trucks. So it will be useful if you can report back on that issue in the interim, as well as at the waste strategy meeting. But also, I think it's also important that we give due regard to the interim solution, which is for bins to be left on the pavement for 4 days. How we think that is concurrent with our commitment to equality, diversity and inclusion in terms of obstructing the footpath for people who are disabled or pedestrians. So that would be really useful for you to feedback on that at the next waste strategy meeting that we have, which is very soon. And if there's anything in specifically for Councillor Iqbal, you can send him an email. Right, so we're going to move on to our customer contact centre report now. Do members have any questions on that? Because I do. No? Well, first of all, you're very welcome to report to this scrutiny board, because I know that some people on the resources scrutiny board were disappointed that they weren't going to have access to these reports in the future. I just wanted to look into them in terms of clarity, because in terms of performance reports, it wasn't quite clear. So I was looking at the Appendix 1, page 51, delivering our best city ambitions, our directorate KPIs. And there was, the maths didn't work out for me, and I'm not very good at maths, so you might be able to enlighten me where I've gone wrong. So there were things like pest control. There were 9,647 gross calls, 312 of which were abandoned, and 3,938 of which were answered. But the answer rate is 94%. How?
I can certainly try and answer that one. I'll get you more information, but I think it's to do with the IVR. So there's a message on the line. So the gross calls is the total number of calls that come into the on that line. So I'm assuming the IVR will have managed the significant number of them. Now, that's my very, as you can appreciate, we've only taken this from the 1st of June. So I'd need to look into that. But that's certainly why there is discrepancy between gross calls and answered calls. I appreciate the abandoned calls. You would imagine that you'd add those two columns, take away, and they'd add up. But that's what I'm thinking. But I will get clarity on that for you.
Councillor Haig.
What's an IVR?
It's the automated system that when you first ring up, you get the automated calls. And we can put messages on that for people, or we can direct them online and things like that through that process.
Councillor Cunningham.
Yeah, thank you. That's what I wondered as well. But then isn't there a way of tracking the outcomes of the IVRs? Then wouldn't they also be classed as answered calls?
They would be classed as answered calls, yes.
So that's where it doesn't add up, isn't it? Yeah.
Sorry, I think this information is based on actually calls answered by a CSO, because that then drives the other information in terms of answer times and things like that. That's the CSO, the actual person answering the call. I will get you some clarity on that.
Councillor Farley.
I'm going to guess here it's just a labelling issue in terms of the table. When you say answered calls, you mean answered calls by a human.
What's the difference between somebody who gets an IVR response which says you can go online to fill this in, and decides to go online, what's the difference between that and an abandoned call?
And that an abandoned call, sorry, was that the last bit of the question? Sorry. Yeah, so on an IVR, they may get a link to go online so that they can be you text the, if they're coming via a mobile, for example, they'll get a link to go online and then they can do that. An abandoned call can be just somebody has chosen to drop out the queue. So there's a number of reasons why that can happen. That could be something to do with them rather than the wait time, for example. But we have introduced last year a process of callback. So if you're in the queue, so if the queue length is more than 5 minutes or there's more than 10 calls in the queue, you can now request a callback as well. So it'll automatically ring you back so you're not having to wait in the queue anymore. But an abandoned call, there's many reasons why people abandon. Some of them are to do with us in terms of wait times, but a lot of them are to do with people themselves. They're just not happy to wait for a period of time. The average abandoned wait is 8 minutes, and that's on council tax general. So there's an 8 minute, that's the longest on average that anybody waits before they abandon. And that's the highest. It drops down to minutes on some. We get people who will abandon within 10 seconds of going on the call. So.
Is this something that members might wish to have a little bit more information on? I think it might be. We'll come back to this another time. So that's the Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Councillor Galton. I just want to point out to Scrutiny Board actually that there's been huge improvements in the contact centre over recent years. And this report does actually state that. So we've gone from you know, an average of an 11-minute wait to now being answered you know, in 6 minutes. There has been a lot of changes, digital changes. There's been transformation in the way that people contact the council as well. So there ain't always necessary as many people ringing as there was in the past, but they're using other routes through to the council to be able to get the solution that they need. So so if I may offer some advice to Scrutiny Board, that if you want to look at just the contact centre in that sense, I think you're not getting the whole story. So for me, I think you'd need to be looking at the customer contact through all routes with the council in terms of how they you know, do that and how well the council responds to that. I've had responsibility in my executive role for the contact centre for around 9 years, and I think it's in the best shape that it's been in all that time. I've now passed that over as that's no longer under my remit anymore, but I'm glad to be able to pass it over in such good shape.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Well, I'm sure that Scrutiny Board would wish to have the same level of assurance as you, but as we have had less, what's the word? Less intimate contact with it ourselves, I think it's useful for us to have an understanding of the data which is put in front of us. So, for instance, when maths don't add up at this level of reporting, it'd be really nice to get underneath that reporting, and in the interests of inclusivity, we want to make sure that the automation which is in the system in terms of making sure that people are encouraged to go online is also supplemented with real human interaction where that online portal doesn't work for people, and I think it's an area that would be worthy of better investigation and what's the word? Getting to know it a little bit better. I think actually maybe a visit to the contact centre might be appropriate for us as board members and something that we can discuss going forward. Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Councillor Haig.
Yeah, it's about Councillor Cooper's point really, because she's right, I think, to say that most people don't necessarily call the council when they want to interact with council services, but we don't have any information or KPIs about how that is, how people find working with the website, how people find the service to be accessible for them. So I think if we are going to look at what we're having in this report, then it would be really useful to look more broadly than simply telephone interactions, especially when those are then leading to an online interaction.
Thank you, Councillor Haig. Councillor Jones.
I actually use this service, and I've got to say, when I ring up, it's 5 minutes, maybe a bit more. But when I ring HMRC or any other provider, to be absolutely honest, we should be advising these people how to do it, because these call times to me are absolutely unbelievable compared to, I spent 3 hours last week trying to sort a tax issue out. And to be honest, I didn't sort it out because eventually there comes a point where I think, actually, this is a waste of my time. I'll pay a bit more tax. I'm not going to argue about it. But to be absolutely honest, I think that is an incredible set of figures. And I think people need congratulated for the way that's been done. That's my personal opinion.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. I see a lot of nodding heads. We've all got very frustrating experiences outside of the council. So, are there any other comments on the performance report? In general, going towards the end. Councillor Anderson.
Is grass cutting. What percentage of our verges have been cut properly? Because the bottom line, I'll cut to the chase. The bottom line is our residents are confused with what is relaxed mowing and what is not relaxed mowing. There is confusion out there. People are saying, coming to me and saying, well, has this verge not been cut because it's part of the relaxed mowing, or is it just not been cut because it's wet? We need to improve our communication, and we've definitely got a problem at the moment with a number of our verges have not been cut. And is that just in certain areas, or is that a citywide issue? What percentage of the grass cut, the verge cut that are meant to be done, what percentage of them have actually been done?
Councillor Anderson, which KPI are you pointing to?
Well, that's the point. There's not one for it. That's the point where we're being asked to talk about things, but there's not a point on it. And it's how, because I'm suggesting that maybe we, as a scrutiny board, look into the grass cutting to find out what more we can do in terms of better communication and better explanation to residents as to why certain verges have not been cut this year. And as John Woolmer knows, I've also been advised by Gully Cleansing that one of their major concerns is that our gullies are getting full because we've not been clearing the gullies and we've not been sweeping the streets enough, and that's been causing blockages. That's what they tell me. John Wilmer disputes that. I accept that, but
can I offer some information, Councillor Anderson? And we did have some preliminary discussions with the different departments about what they thought needed to come forward to be discussed with scrutiny going forward. And the grass cutting contract is due for renewal, and they would wish to engage with us. And I think there's a paper scheduled to come in October, I understand. If there's anything that could be offered in the meantime, Councillor Rafiq.
Yeah, I'm just going to suggest that is something on the schedule and will come to a future board meeting. But also, I think it might be worth for the board to have input into, because the grass cutting, although I think I'm not going to go into any specific ward related issues in what Councillor Anderson's referring to here, as is not on the today's report. But I think given the season we have, the rain and fall, there are been some issues in terms of getting out there. But having said that, there's also the motive sensitive issue about what people think is relaxed mowing. We get on one hand, people want relaxed mowing and don't want the grass to be cut, and then you get other people who want to be cut like a bowling green. So it's a very difficult issue for the service, and we have got, based on what people have said in the past, we've got an agreed contract with our contract continuity service, and we're happy to discuss that about the renewal and when we come to a future board meeting in autumn, Chair. Okay.
Can members be assured that there is mapping of where relaxed mowing is meant to be, and that this could be produced for members at a community committee level before the October meeting to discuss the renewal of the contract?
Yes, that's fine. I can do that.
Any other issues on the performance management report? Okay, thank you very much. I think at this stage we can now relieve people who aren't associated with the next report, which is radon reporting. And many thanks for your patience and attendance today, if the others wish to leave. Okay, so let's go on to the radon reporting. Adam Crampton.
Thank you, Chair. I guess briefly, just for the benefit of new members to the board, in July of last year, a paper was presented to Scrutiny Board, provided information on radon gas and more specifically radon gas in Leeds. This paper outlined that the perceived risk posed by radon gas in Leeds was low, but limited if any testing had been had taken place to either confirm or dispute that perception. So the purpose of that July 23 report was to outline the intended approach of Housing Leeds to undertake a testing programme, and that programme was devised in collaboration with colleagues in public health within Leeds City Council and the UK Health Security Agency, formerly Public Health England. The purpose of today's report is to provide board with an interim update on progress of the testing programme, both in terms of volume and results received to date. Sections 1 to 3 of the report do provide some background information on radon gas, including detail of the safe level of radon gas, 200 bericles per metre cubed in air. That's referred to as the action level. So that's really the important level that we're referring to when we're talking about this subject. We also summarise the testing methodology applied and the target volumes to be achieved in our testing programme. So section 4 is kind of the key section of the report, really. We update the action taken to date since this item was last presented to board. This has included a lot of process development activity, communications and engagement materials, but more importantly, physical testing of properties. To date, monitor equipment has been installed in 109 homes in the wards in scope of the phase 1 testing programme, albeit 11 of those tests have been abandoned for reasons that we outline in the paper. The testing is non-compulsory, so to achieve this 109 homes that have been tested to date, 335 residents have been contacted to achieve that volume. Section 4.4 of the report outlines the status of each of those tests, and you'll see that the testing, return and analysis has been completed on 35 of those, 34, that should read, sorry, of those properties. And of the results received to date, none of them have exceeded that 200 bericule action level. 2 homes have measured above 100 bericles, which is referred to as the target level. That's the ideal level that we're looking for, 150 bericles and 130 bericles respectively. And in line with the UK Health Security Agency methodology, these homes are now being retested. We're on track to achieve the volumes as set out in last year's report. And while initial results are encouraging, we don't wish to draw any conclusions until the full phase 1 testing volumes have been completed. A little bit under the lessons learned, we are seeing only a 30% uptake in participation in the testing programme, which does mean the process is extremely resource demanding. And as such, we continue to refine our comms and engagement materials in order to sort of stimulate that engagement further. Finally, we continue to work with colleagues in public health and in the UK Health Security Agency, as well as colleagues in other local authorities in order to share best practice and maintain that collaborative approach throughout. Scrutiny Board is asked to support the continuation of the phase 1 testing programme, following which it's recommended that a further report is presented to this board. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Adam. We also have Dawn Bailey here, who's Chief Officer Public Health. Did you want to add anything before questions are taken? No? Okay, thank you. Members, do we have any questions on this first stage of the radon testing report? Councillor McCluskey.
The intended sample size, do you think that's sufficient? And is the geographical area sufficient as well? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. So the geographical areas are based on the advanced postcode assessment that we undertook last year, commissioning the UK Health Security to undertake that. So the geographical areas are based on the highest risk of those of that postcode list assessment. And just to provide some context to that, there are 6 categories of risk rating, less than 1% going up to above 30% risk rating. Our highest risk in Leeds was in the 3 to 5% category. So just to provide some context to that. So it's risk-based, based on that postcode list assessment. And really it's about it being proportionate to that level of risk is the sample size. So we outlined last year that our initial sample size will start with a 5% sample within that area. Should we identify any properties exceeding that action level, our sample sizes will increase accordingly.
Councillor Lennox.
I just want to really briefly thank Adam and everyone who's been involved in this, because it's quite a it's a very important and major thing that radon in other areas of the country, in public buildings and social housing, has become a really serious issue. But I'm really pleased that in Leeds we're doing as thorough checks as we've been able to, and this is only phase 1. You know, we will move forward and hopefully meet that bigger sample size. But it's just really reassuring so far. I think it's, especially when there's been quite a lot of public attention on concrete and safety of concrete in public buildings over the last couple of years. I'm really pleased that we're able to give these results and really clearly prove how safe we are in Leeds regards this issue.
Can I ask a question about take-up? You said that you're roughly a 30% take-up of people that you've contacted. Does that mean that some areas are significantly underrepresented? So, for instance, in one area, have you had 60% response, in another area you've had 10? Or is it quite consistent across the different people you've talked to?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. Broadly speaking, it's consistent across all those areas. It won't be to the exact kind of percentage figure, but broadly speaking, we have targeted the areas in scope of this phase 1 testing as widely as we possibly can. So we're not kind of targeting a particular street and hitting that hard. For example, it is spread across those postcode areas that were identified.
Can I also clarify in terms of it being a joint exercise, because you mentioned that you'd identified the geography with the help of an outside national agency, and obviously we're working in cooperation with public health here. Is this testing a process which is being funded through the housing revenue account, or is it a public health issue, or is it something which we've had support from national agencies to achieve?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. Just to kind of outline the approach. So the areas that were identified via the UK Health Security Agency was on the basis of us providing all housing leads postcodes to the UK Health Security Agency, and they undertook that assessment on our behalf. So we commissioned that as housing leads. So that identified the risk areas, and then, as mentioned earlier, our testing methodology has been on a risk basis. We are funding this through the housing revenue account. We're doing so as a responsible landlord. We need to know the level of risk within our homes. The relationship with colleagues in public health really is to establish within each of these areas where we have housing leads properties. That gives us an extensive baseline kind of testing, really. If we do get to a point that we identify there is a wider risk in those areas, then that's obviously part of the discussions that we'll be having in due course around the implications beyond the housing leads stock.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions from members? And when will we have the next round reported to us?
Results are returned kind of on a periodic basis. Generally, every couple of months we get returns. I would request that around July of 2025 we'll have the full phase 1 testing results completed. So around that date would be most helpful, Chair.
What do members think about that? I see lots of nods. If there is anything which is statistically outstanding compared to the results that you have delivered so far, would you report that to Scrutiny Board in the interim?
Happy to do so, Chair.
Okay, thanks very much for that. We now go on to our next item, which is sources of work and work programme. Becky, do you want to introduce this one?
As you know, members, you receive your draft work programme at each meeting. It's a live document, it's member owned. There's a slightly extended report with it this time, just with it being the first meeting of the municipal year, just to remind members of various sources that are usually of interest. There's a draft work schedule included at the pack at page 125. That collates requests from members to date from the previous Scrutiny Board of 23-24 and known items of business such as budget consultation and performance monitoring. I'll pick up issues that have been identified today and liaise with colleagues and the chair to schedule those where appropriate. But if there are other items, if they could be directed through the chair ahead of the next meeting, I'll try and build those in as well.
Are members okay with that approach? Yeah. There are some additional items that are yet to be scheduled. Now, we've already talked about how we're going to be having a look at the grass cutting contract, probably in October. The future of the clean neighbourhood teams is something that Councillor Anderson is particularly interested in. It would be useful if they have sent stuff out to community committees that we can then look at that later in the year. What else have we got? We've got, oh yes, our housing department wished to come back to talk to us about the housing allocation property, and Councillor Lennox already outlined how the extreme pressures on affordable housing that we have available to us, and they'd appreciate our input there. Also, there's an issue around selective licensing, where there's an ambition to extend that to a greater proportion of the city than is already covered, which we could also look at. And adaptions and access to homes, which is associated with our EDI focus in terms of ensuring that there is sufficient supply of accessible homes for those that need it. Now, there's something that's on my list here that says consumer standards update, which I don't know what it is. Do you want to let me know what that is, Becky?
That came out of your briefing with Gerard Tinsdale and was something that he suggested he may want to do a working group with members outside the public sessions. Councillor
Lennox.
I'm trying to remember what I think it was regarding the new regulator of social housing that we meant that we would offer members an overview of, because the regulator of social housing is now in place, and it's a little bit like Ofsted but for social landlords. So we have a self-reporting channel in that, and there's lots of stuff that we've had to bring together to provide us information, and it will act as a regulator of us as a social landlord. So I think Jez was offering to offer members a seminar or something on that.
I think that'd be very welcome. So a lot of the ideas for further scrutiny to add to our work programme seems to be coming from the housing department, which is very much appreciated and indicates an inclusive approach to policy development. So thank you. No further comments on that one? We'll look at that as we go through our schedule of meetings going forward. Date and time of the next meeting?
18th of July, Chair, at 10:30.
Post-election. I look forward to that. Thank you very much for your attendance today, and look forward to seeing you. Enjoy the weather.